So, before we get too far away from the big news of Tom Holland's Spider-Man having to exit the MCU, I wanted to make this video. I was thinking about making it over on the main channel, but considering I really want my first Endgame showcase to be my next video, and the ratio of videos of me talking versus LEGO videos that have been coming out recently on the channel over the past couple months hasn't really been quite where I like it to be. Like, I'd rather keep posting LEGO videos than have these be more few and far between rather than like half-half, and so decided I wanted to talk about it here really quick. And I think I speak for everybody on the internet who has made a video about this. This is not a video that I think I expected to make, or videos that anyone else in the world expected to make. Sony has pulled Spider-Man back and out of the MCU, forcing Tom Holland out of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I never thought we would get to this point. I didn't think this was really possible anymore. After the news broke in 2015, Spider-Man coming to the MCU to debut in Captain America: Civil War. Sony and Disney have struck a deal to share the character. I thought that was it. Smooth sailing from here. Spider-Man would always be with the Avengers now. He had entered the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and through Sony and Marvel's collaboration, they delivered the greatest live-action Spider-Man I think our generation will ever see. The greatest live-action Spider-Man we may ever see in our lifetime with Tom Holland. And he's appeared in 2 of his own movies and 5 movies total in just 3 years, since April of 2016. And he has been incredible and spectacular and amazing in every single one, fully embodying Peter Parker and the role of Spider-Man. Now we get to August 2019, and sure, we had heard that there were all these crazy rumors that, Sony may pull Spider-Man back now that Far From Home made $1 billion and they're going to have to renegotiate. It's like, okay, fine. If there is something going on behind the scenes, they'll renegotiate. It's making too much money. It's too successful. And yes, Venom was a success for Sony, but that's one success out of many failures. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, apparently not a financial success, but the greatest Spider-Man movie ever developed. So Sony isn't completely incapable, but I don't think they're capable of delivering a live-action version of Peter Parker as Spider-Man the same way Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios are. I mean, this iteration of Spider-Man that entered the Marvel Cinematic Universe that has worked so perfectly, in large part, worked because of Kevin Feige's influence, because of it being weaved into the MCU, and because of the uniqueness of the story. That's one thing that is, on top of Tom Holland being the perfect Spider-Man, that's always set him apart, and in this version of Spider-Man, apart from the rest, is that they made it a point, whether because of legalities and not being able to use all the characters or what have you, to go in the complete opposite direction of every other version of Spider-Man, starting him off pretty much at what you would consider to be end of Spider-Man life stories, right? He meets Iron Man. He fights against Thanos and the greatest threat the universe has ever known. Dies in the greatest cataclysmic event the universe has ever seen, dying with trillions of people across the stars. I mean, facing the Vulture all on his own before any of that. And then coming out of all of those just unbelievable events to face Mysterio and be betrayed. Well, while he's still emotionally vulnerable from what happened. All of that is so vastly different from anything we've ever had before. We didn't have a typical Mary Jane or Green Goblins or Oscorp or any of that stuff. No Doc Ock. None of that. And I think that's a big part of why the Spider-Man films and this iteration of Spider-Man was also successful, on top of Tom Holland's excellent portrayal, because of how unique the stories were. Now, I myself always prefer a classic take on Spider-Man. I like to see MJ. I like to see, Oscorp and the Green Goblins. I like to see the Sinister Six. Those are all the things that make Spider-Man really exciting for me, which is why Spider-Man PS4 is one of my favorite Spider-Man stories of all time. If not my favorite Spider-Man story of all time, period. I don't know yet. I really haven't thought about it that much. But I never thought that it would just get abruptly cut off. Now, of course, the entire internet has been in uproar for a while now, and, these last couple of days. And so you've had so many people sharing their 2 cents. I mean, the whole, I was surprised to see the internet really divided and split between siding with Disney or siding with Sony. I mean, personally, I was siding with Disney more before I started to think about it. When it first happened, I mean, when the feelings are really raw and Sony has messed up so many times in the past, you tend to just to completely direct all the blame toward them, but both sides are at fault. So reportedly, the deal that Disney has had with Sony all this time, since 2015, has been to take Spider-Man's box office gross, and then Sony gets all of that. Disney takes 5%. So Sony gets the other 95% of the Spider-Man box office gross. I don't know how they worked it out for his appearances in the Avengers films and Civil War. However, Marvel, Disney, they would still retain all of the revenue for toys and merchandising, which is a lot. And so, like I said earlier, and I think like a lot of the internet can agree on, the large part of why this iteration of Spider-Man is so successful is because it was the first version of Spider-Man to meet Iron Man, to interact and fight alongside the Avengers and the Guardians of the Galaxy. So, after the success of Far From Home, making over $1 billion and becoming Sony's highest grossing film ever, Marvel and Disney stepped in and said, hey, we want what everybody thought they said was 50%. And they wanted to split it half-half. More recent reports have been coming out this past day that it was actually 30% they were asking for. And then the counter-argument to that is, well, Disney pretty much controls all of entertainment. They're too big. It's scary, it's freaky, and horrifying. But at the same time, if you set all that aside, you can't really argue with the logic there. If this version of Spider-Man is successful because of his inclusion in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and him interacting with all the other characters, and the unique stories that have been afforded to the character because of this new run that he's on in the MCU, you can't say that it's necessarily wrong to ask for more of what they might have really believed that they deserve. Now, of course, all of this could also be a giant public stunt, and we're all just playing right into the game, much like James Gunn. This will all be retracted in a couple months, and we'll have nothing to worry about going forward. I hope that's the case. But if it's not, if this doesn't work out, I'm done. And I mean it. I grew up with Tobey Maguire, never even knew who the Avengers were as a kid. Got to Andrew Garfield, accepted that Sony owned Spider-Man, and was enjoying the Amazing Spider-Man movies for what they were. And for a lot of reasons, I personally prefer Andrew Garfield to Tobey Maguire, which is not a popular opinion at all. But then having that trilogy cut short and sacrificing that to have Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, now for this to be cut short too, I don't know what to say. I will not care about live-action Spidey after this point. Tom Holland embodies the role of Peter Parker, like I said. Like I think the world said. And is the definitive on-screen Spider-Man. And to just pull him out of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, regress the character all the way back as if he never was in the MCU to begin with, and move on with a sequel as if he never met Iron Man, never got snapped away, never fought alongside the Avengers. I can't get on board with that. There's no way you make that work. Tom Holland's Spider-Man and his entire story is so directly tied into the influence Iron Man had on his life and his experiences with the Avengers. And they made Happy Hogan his mentor figure now. And set up his future in the MCU as essentially carrying the torch of Iron Man, but in his own way. You don't go forward with a third movie and ignore all of that. It doesn't work. You don't just make Spider-Man 3 and 4, hold Tom Holland hostage in your now non-MCU versions of Spider-Man movies with him still in them, and then, I don't know, make your Venom, Carnage, Spider-Man cross... Sony is very liable to screw these up. And I don't want to be there when they do. And I certainly don't want to be there after when Tom Holland leaves. It's a problem in Hollywood that, unfortunately, a lot of studios, aside from Marvel Studios, have faced. You know, once you have the actor, you don't really get to move on after that point. Once you have Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans, there's no one who's going to play those two roles better, which is why they're not going to just recast Iron Man or Captain America. Same thing goes for Spider-Man, and it leaves the entire fan base and the world at large who's been enjoying this live-action iteration of Spider-Man, the first to debut with the Avengers, and to be so expertly portrayed, at a loss. And I just didn't think we would be back here. I didn't think Spider-Man would regress back to a Sony exclusive character. It was all a joke. Until now, when it's not.